Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome. Welcome to this session on virtual team building. My name is Ruth Cook. I'm the Managing Director and founder of Action Learning Associates. And with me on the team today, I have Sonia Antel, who's the co-director, and who'll be helping looking at questions later, and Julie Kenyon and Klaus Lammers, who are on the support team. I can see that we've got a mixture of people who both work within their organisations, 52%, and some who work as an external facilitator, 36%. Okay, so what I'm going to be saying is aimed at both, so that's useful, and also a real mix between senior leadership teams, middle management, and your own teams, line management, direct teams. The structure of our session, my plan is to be able to talk for the next 20-25 minutes, and we'll be exploring these various topics, and I'll take you through them, and then there'll be plenty of time for questions. So it goes without saying really that we're in a time of massive change, and we've all seen how working practices have had to be adapted very quickly. We're also facing a huge economic crisis, and for those of you who are working in the public or the voluntary or the cultural sector, faced with enormous challenges about future funding. So businesses, organisations and individual staff all faced with a huge challenge. And what we're seeing is that teams are coming back together in different ways. So there's a mixture of home and office working, full and part-time, changing to different working hours, people balancing childcare in this particular time. A recent survey showed that of 1,000, this was in the UK, 1,500 people, and 48% of those who worked in an office prior to the lockdown said they would be considering asking for some more remote working. So remote working is probably likely to be a part of our lives for the foreseeable future. 1 in 4 people believe a more flexible working life would have a positive impact on them, and by extension their employers. And over half believe flexibility would increase their productivity and their loyalty. So there are benefits to organisations and there are benefits to individuals. But what it of course means is that there is less face-to-face time for team members. So we really have to think about team building. So we've got to adapt behaviour, and we all know how hard that can be for some people, and we need to find fresh ways of working. You've probably already observed that there are differing abilities to cope with distance working. For some people, they've really enjoyed it and they felt more productive, less interrupted, and they haven't missed the commute. And for other people, it's been a really difficult time, and working with a screen, perhaps not in ideal circumstances in their home, balancing lots of other things, childcare, homeschooling, has led to increased pressure. And I think what we're seeing is a time of uncertainty, certainly lots of things outside of our control, and therefore insecurity and fear. And what's happening, I think, is that people can be retreating into their own bubble. So as team leaders, as senior leaders in organisations, as external facilitators, there's less straightforward opportunity for relationship building. And what we're also noticing in our contact with business and organisations is that sometimes the balance isn't right in virtual meetings between how are you doing and what are you doing. So yes, there has to be checking in with people as to how they are, chance to find out the sort of thing that you would normally notice as they walked in the door, but also there needs to be a focus on purpose and what you're wanting to achieve as a team, and that balance needs to be right. So let's think about team building normally. What would you normally do for team building. Most organisations have patterns of away days or team development days, and they have a cycle of regular meetings. You would normally, depending on the culture of the organisation, but you'd probably be organising some social or informal events, and of course spending time one-to-one. So what you would normally do as a result of all those things is be clear about roles, differing roles, everyone understanding different roles, clear about expectations and ways of working, and that you'd be defining the norms about communication. This is how we do things around here. This is the level of detail I expect to know from you. But of course, what also happens is that you would normally benefit from that less formal, spontaneous meeting in the corridor, bumping into each other over a cup of coffee, finding out what somebody thought about a meeting as they leave. So all of those things can't necessarily happen when you're working with a virtual team. So virtual team building, what are the principles, the guidelines that we would suggest in terms of what you need to be doing? First of all, allow some check-in time. So as I've just said, you may not know what's been going on for people. You may not know what they have just left. If someone walked into a meeting flustered, anxious, you would pick up the signs, and you need to be able to just have a time for people to say how they are in a virtual team meeting. They may have left screaming, fighting children downstairs with their other half. That's the kind of thing that it just really helps people to acknowledge and to say. Secondly, be clear about the purpose and the outcome. What is it that you want to achieve? So a team building event, maybe it's a regular team activity, but what is its purpose? You're really clear about it. And then you structure the process. So our experience of virtual facilitation, and some of you I know have attended previous webinars on these topics, is that you do need to be more directive. People need more structure at the moment. And also not everybody is equally comfortable contributing. So you'll have some people who've adapted, who are fine, who are very confident in the digital world, and other people who are still hesitant and reluctant to contribute. Keep a good record of agreements. So what you're doing here is establishing the new protocols for the team, your new ways of working. So what is it you're trying to create? People will know probably Patrick Lencioni's work, probably most famously his deficit model of the 5 dysfunctions of a team. But turning that into a positive, what is it that you're trying to create in terms of a high-performing team? How would you know that you've got a high-performing team? This is what you want to get out of virtual team building or any team building. First of all, that there's a degree of trust, probably the most important ingredient. So people are comfortable about their fears, their weaknesses, any mistakes. They're honest with each other, they're open, they're willing to ask for help. They're willing to take risks if they're offering feedback or assistance. They appreciate each other's talents, and they enjoy working as a group. And obviously we all know that building trust takes time, and maintaining trust takes time and takes work. Second characteristic is embracing conflict. How do you know when you've got people who are willing to engage in conflict? Well, there's an ability to use the ideas of all the team members, to put critical topics on the table for open and honest debate, and a willingness to solve problems quickly without office politics getting in the way. So team meetings are lively, open, interesting. Commitment. A high-performing team has a high level of commitment. When people are genuinely achieving, they're committed to achieving team goals, and they're aligning around common objectives. So there's clarity about the direction and the priorities, and an ability to learn from mistakes. And the team isn't afraid to change direction. Fourth characteristic, accountability. So how do you know when you have that? The team members commit to a standard of performance and to goals, and then they hold one another accountable. So it's not just the manager who's doing that. All of the team members have a sense of contributing to the goals and being accountable for what they individually deliver. And then there's a focus on results. So the team members are willing to set aside individual egos and individual needs and to focus on what's best for the team. And their priority is collective results that define their success. So what you've got then is a very achievement-oriented staff team. That's what you're aiming for. So what about action learning for teams? When is that useful? Well, those of you who are familiar, and I saw from the list of attendees that there are a number of old friends and colleagues, so welcome to people who know us from old, and those of you who are new as well. Those of you who know us will know that we often say that action learning works best amongst a group of peers and not necessarily in the same team. So a group of peers might be across an organisation, across a large organisation, doing similar roles, or they may be across the sector, or they may be from completely different organisations. Maybe they're all chief execs or all directors or all research managers, and they meet together in an action learning set. So when can you use action learning with a team? Firstly, I'd say that it's good to use a trained action learning first facilitator, definitely for the first few sessions. Action learning is a powerful tool, and you need somebody who really knows what they're doing and can hold that space for other people. Secondly, it requires a well-functioning team. So if you've got a problem team, a dysfunctional team, I would not say that action learning is the solution. I would think that you would need to do some other team building or team development activity first, maybe use some diagnostic tools, maybe have one-to-one with individual team members, but the team needs to be reasonably well functioning before you can put action learning into the mix. And there needs to be a reasonable degree of trust and openness. And those of you who've experienced action learning, perhaps in our facilitator training, will know that we work at achieving that trust and openness within the group. And it's quite hard to imagine doing action learning if that didn't exist. And there needs to be clear contracting. So people need to know what they're signing up to if they agree to do action learning within a team, so that you can have open, honest and respectful communication. And the outcome is that there's learning and there's action. So people take away from an action learning session individual or team actions, and because of the process that you've gone through, there's ownership of the actions and obviously organisational benefits. Let me talk about some examples of action learning for teams. And these are all ones that we either are delivering or have delivered in the past. Firstly, we've been working with a global beauty brand and with their sales directors. One action learning set was for North and Central America, and one action learning set was for the sales directors for Europe. And in fact, the latter one ended yesterday, and they have agreed to continue as a self-facilitating action learning set. So that means that the organisation has gained a peer network that's committed to individual learning, and the people on that, in that action learning set, use the space to talk about the context that they were working in, the changing market conditions, what was happening within the senior leadership of the company, and the impact that was having on all of them. And they have built a really powerful network that they all appreciate, and they're very busy people. So to allocate, they met for 3 hours virtually every 6 weeks, but to allocate that time illustrated how important and useful it was for them. Second example is creative partnerships, and this was some time ago, but we worked with the directors of creative partnerships as it was then, and this was an initiative about bringing creativity and innovation into schools. And the directors working in different parts of the country needed to learn from each other's experience, needed to have time to exchange operational, strategic information amongst themselves. What are we doing? What's working? What do we need to be saying to our headquarters about what resources we need? Those kinds of important discussions were the ones that happened in their regular action learning sets. Very different example, an engineering company who were in a turnaround situation, and their regional directors came together in an action learning set. They'd all been given key projects that were about the future success of the company. And of course, the implementation of those projects needed each other. So they used action learning to develop the projects, to report to each other on progress, and to involve their colleagues in how those developed. And because they were coming from extreme ends of the countries, they met for 24 hours, didn't do action learning for the whole 24 hours, but each person had a slot of time within that 24-hour period. And the last example I'll give you is a mental health charity where the regional managers were responsible both for winning and running very big contracts, and there was a highly pressurized job. And what they did was use action learning for their days that they had together to talk about what are the challenges that you're facing, how can I learn from what you're doing? So exchange of best practice and honest exchange of the real difficulties they were facing in their role. So that's the kind of range of teams that we've worked with using action learning. And I hope that gives you a flavour of the kinds of things that you might do and how you might use action learning virtually with teams. So I'm going to stop there and go over to the Q&A to see about your questions. I'm hoping that some people have posed questions as we've been talking, as I've been talking, but if not, you're welcome to put your questions now in the Q&A. So we have a question from Janet. Do we have experience of building a cross-organisational team through action learning where people from different organisations are working in a consortium or partnerships and need to act as a team on a project? Very definitely, Janet. That is quite often how action learning is used. So it's a form of project management, if you like. It's a particular way of relating within a project team meeting where people don't just do that kind of superficial stuff about how's your bit of the project going, but they actually talk in depth. Not everyone every time, but a couple of people at each time they get together, they share what they're each doing about, what they are doing about the project, where they think it's working well, and where they're finding it challenging. And the other project team members will use the action learning approach of asking questions to get them to reflect on their experience. But they will also have a time at the end when they talk about what are the implications of this, what are the implications of this for us as a project team? You know, what's the individual action and what's the team action, so the learning goes more widely.
And Ruth, can I come in there?
Yes, please do.
Hi everyone, it's Sonia, Ruth's colleague. There's a great question from Gregory, and I just answered it with a note, and I'll be interested in your thoughts. He's asking, how do we map the forming, storming, performing, norming part of team development, if you like, virtual team building or virtual team development or team development onto the virtual world? Is it the same? Is it different? And I thought that raised really good kind of questions. And it occurred to me that you would expect to see that development over time. You wouldn't see it in the very first meeting, for instance. It's a process that takes a while in a team. So it's about having a slightly longer view of your virtual team. That was the first thought that came to me on there. And I don't know if you've got any observation there, Ruth?
No, that's fine. I think it's maybe the same Gregory who's also asked about working with different contexts and culture.
Yes, that's right. Yes.
So virtual team building can work really well across different contexts. I don't know if that's Kathy Vaughan from South Africa, and if it is, we've had experience of doing that together in South Africa, where people came from very different contexts. Might be a different Kathy, but I would say you probably need to spend time at the beginning really exploring each other, getting to know each other individually and talking about differences. So making that kind of stuff explicit would help in terms of virtual team building.
There's a great question from Miles here. I think it's the most recent question we've got. How do you build a culture of trust and constructive working and constructive challenge when you're working with a team of people that you haven't yet met? So it's pretty, how do you start building a team with a team you haven't yet met?
Right. And is there anything you want to add to that?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind there, for me, it's about really clear ground rules to start with. The purpose of the team being clear.
Yeah.
And he mentions, I think he mentioned earlier about trust. How do you build trust in the team? And one of the ways you can do is people feel safer and trust more. They feel safe and feel safe if they trust people. And you can create that safety by having people be free about what they can say about themselves. So constructing an exercise where people get to know each other a bit better.
Yeah.
That just kind of opens up what we know about people. That can be quite useful. And
Bernard's asking, why is action learning more appropriate for peers?
And then creating opportunity for the team to interact, perhaps with the team. Yep.
Sorry, we both speaking at the same time there. Bernard's asking, why is action learning more appropriate for peer learning than intact teams? And I guess the simple answer to that is that there can be a lot of team dynamics that enter into intact teams that may be less obvious if you've got, it's not that they're not there, but it's less obvious if you've got a team that are peers across an organisation, for example, but that don't work together on a day-by-day basis. But we have done action learning with intact teams and it's worked really well. So if those conditions exist that I was talking about earlier, trust and openness, willingness to engage, then I think it is possible for intact teams. Anything else that you can see there?
There was an early on question, I think, in the chat function from Graham, and he was suggesting or asking, is it helpful to have an extensive use of breakout rooms before a formal meeting? And it might not sound like a helpful answer, but my thought there, Graham, was it depends on the purpose of the meeting. So it might be that a waiting room where people can't talk is what you want, but you might want to open a chat room where they can. Or you might want to open a series of chat rooms where people who are, I don't know, thinking about a certain project are in one place. And if they're thinking about a different project or the budgeting or, I don't know, whatever it might be, the marketing, they're in another place. So I think my response to that question, which is a, very good question in these virtual times, is the use of how much you use the technology and what you use it for depends on what you're wanting to do with the team. Or it might be you want to keep the team together and then open them up and have some people do a piece of work on something, some people do a piece of work on another part of an agenda, and then come back together. So that would be my kind of thought to that. It's a great question. We're hearing a lot of those questions at the moment.
And trust, Jason asked about trust being built through virtual meetings if you can see people through the video link. Yes, that is interesting, because we've been doing virtual action learning for a long time, prior to Zoom being all part of our lives, part of our standard working lives. And originally we worked purely with audio. And actually it is amazing how much you can learn about each other and what's going on just through audio. And if you're working internationally, where people have poor bandwidth, then that may be a requirement that you do it just as audio. And we would say that that doesn't stop it being an effective team building activity. That's our experience anyway, Jason. Are there any more questions coming up? And are there any that we've missed along the way?
There was a good observation from Karen around working virtually with teams, which is that in this medium, much as we've got here, as well as having the chance for people to speak, particularly when it isn't a webinar, when it's a meeting, as well as being able to speak, people can add things in, chat functions or whatever. So you can allow for different routes of participation, and that might help with the quieter people. So that was just quite a nice observation, I thought.
Yeah, yeah. And what additional areas might you need to measure in the virtual world? Says Kathy. Is there a pulse check? And some sort of questions about well-being, confidence, etc. So yes, I think that can be appropriate, both in the form of the check-in, but also saying to people, asking people, how is this going? How is this working for you? And maybe if you sense that people aren't would not be open, that you also construct a one-to-one where you find out that those things from people. I think there's quite a lot of evidence now of how demanding it is, neuroscience giving us the data about how demanding it is to sit in front of a screen all day. And I'm hearing of people who are in back-to-back Zoom meetings from the beginning to the end of their working day. And that really doesn't seem healthy and not an activity that we should promote. We can construct team events that include regular breaks. So I mean, we sometimes have a training day that's either 4 or 6 hours, but we would take an hour's break within that, and we'd take tea breaks and coffee breaks within it as well. So it is possible to do it as long as you pay attention to people's well-being within the time together.
There's an interesting question here, Ruth, that I think we've got experience of over some time from Katja. How do you get commitment to attendance? And the question's rooted in the voluntary sector, you know, with caseloads and workload often wins out. But something that, you know, if I speak about it, I'd be interested to hear your view as well, because we've been working virtually now for well over 10 years. And we agree dates and commitments with a group of people up front. So we all agree, and if one of the participants can't be available that week, we have a meeting a week, everybody can participate. So we try and do really clear contracting in terms of attendance, and that really helps. And of course it takes time. You know, it's easier to just stick something in somebody's diary and they don't know it's there till they open their diary. That's not the way to get commitment. You know, commitment is a better one. And you say to people, you know, this is what we'll be doing over these next weeks. You know, if you're going to do it, you know, if you are committed to it, we really like you to attend. It's really important, you know, and if you, and to sign in for it. Yeah. So that's the thought I've got there. I don't know if you've got any other observation about the difference between it being virtual and face-to-face, Ruth.
Yeah, I think our experience has been in the past, I'm not sure that this is so true during lockdown, but it has been in the past that sometimes it's easier for people to opt out of a commitment to a virtual session. You know, they haven't got travel booked, they haven't earmarked the whole day for a physical action learning set, and so there can be a sort of a lower bar to kind of I just can't make it, which is really negative for an action learning set. So as Sonia's saying, we really have to work at making the commitment explicit and making it as strong as if they had got a plane or a train booked. Teresa asked about the optimal time for online action learning sessions. We're finding that it is generally 3 hours is great. That's our standard. Sometimes people ask for 2, and that's possible. I personally think 3 is better, but if people are feeling really pressurized and the amount of time they're spending on a screen, they may want to opt for 2. And what about people who hate IT? I think, yeah, we know those people, and it probably means they're not going to contribute to team events. I would say talking one-to-one with them about what do they need, what would help, maybe arranging some one-to-one coaching for them, to see it as a development need, perhaps to set it as a development objective for them, so that you acknowledge that it's there, you make it explicit with that individual, and you talk about what they need.
If I can come in there, Ruth,
please do.
Because we've been working virtually for a long time. When lockdown happened and we had to convert, the rest of the work from face-to-face to virtual, we did have lots of people who weren't used to Zoom and Teams, or weren't comfortable, or were nervous. And we really went a long way over March and April to do one-to-ones with people. If you want to check this out first with us, we'll do that with you. And that took some of the stress out of people then joining a meeting the following week. And it was very time consuming. It was very time consuming, lots of diary scheduling going on and so on. But if you're in that situation and you really want to work with your team, and you've got somebody who you really want to pull in, you may need to just go that extra mile to get them to do the same.
Yeah. Tips for engaging staff that you sense are becoming too isolated and reluctant to engage digitally. I would definitely say have a one-to-one conversation with them. Check out your perception. There may be something else going on. There may be something in their home circumstances, in the particular pressures that they're facing, that you're not aware of. But given that if you've got a team that are all working remotely, it's a requirement for them to engage digitally, then I think you need to ask, what is it that would support them? How can you help them? And as I say that, I'm conscious that there are some people who are becoming incredibly isolated because of fear of going out at all, even now it's allowed. And that for those individuals, it really is about their mental health and their well-being, and they may need some specialist support. I think we're going to see a lot of that in the next few months.
Can I make a kind of more specific observation there? There are things you can do to structure your meetings that make it easy for people. So characteristically, often in our teams, 2 or 3 people out of 7 or 8 take up more space because they're the chatty ones or whatever. You can make an effort, whether you're doing it face to face, although now we're talking virtually, to do some things in what we'd call a round. So everybody takes it in turn to answer a particular question, for instance, or to reflect on some material that's been sent earlier, and model that that we're all going to take it in turn to speak, and we're all going to listen to each other, and leave the debate. It's not to stop debate or discussion, it's to put a boundary around debate or discussion. And what that can do for the reluctant ones is make it easier for them to find their voice in that space.
Yeah.
If they're just going to be saying something and they know they're going to be heard and they've seen others be heard, and that can really help as well with feeling valued if you're someone who's, for whatever reason, finding it difficult to come forward in this situation. So there's also kind of group techniques, group facilitation techniques to bear in mind, I think, that can help.
Thank you. Are there any other questions you can see, Sonia, that we should just in the last few minutes focus on? Maybe one more.
There's an observation from Emma in the, I think it's in the chat function. Okay. She's talking about an unhappy team due to organisational changes. And then team talks sadly, an opportunity to kind of overwhelm someone with complaints. Now, I spent some time on this issue with a different team yesterday, doing how do you do a restructure with integrity virtually. And one of the things we were talking about yesterday is absolute clarity about when you're delivering a message, when you're taking views, what is negotiable, what isn't. And those kinds of things can make a big difference. So is a team talk, would it just be coffee? Do you have to be there? Is it just a space because people do need to connect? And differentiating exactly what message and content and process you're trying to deliver at a particular time. So that can also make it safer and clearer for people. And the other thing that can inform us here, whether we're working virtually, even when we're working virtually, is all the work around resistance to change, which will be even highlighted because of what the virus has done to the world and the working world. So organizational changes being delivered virtually 4 months into the time of virus is a massive amount of change to expect people to absorb. And the reality is we've all got a limited capacity to deal with change. Mine might be a great deal today, but this time next month it might not be. And that's the same for our team. So it's being conscious of all of those elements as well. But a really serious challenge, I think, that Emma's highlighted.
Thank you, Emma. Okay, thank you. There's been some great questions there. Thank you very much. I want to tell you about some of the courses that are coming up. And first of all, there's the a half-day course in July, 17th of July, on virtual facilitator training, and 24th of September, best practice in facilitation. So you can look on the website for both of those. There are also our standard courses about action learning facilitator training, and all of those are being held online through the autumn. So there are dates for those on the website, and I would say they're getting very well booked up. So please do book if you would like a place on those. And an offer from one more course, which is a new course that's going to be happening in September, virtual team building. So the kind of things that we've been talking about today expanded into a whole virtual program. So look out for the date there. There's an offer from Sonia and me that we'd be very happy to have a conversation with you if you'd like to talk about how our virtual facilitation training might help your organisation or your company. So please do email us, and you can tick that box when we get to the closing poll, and we'll be in touch to set up a time to talk to one or other of us. I also just want to mention that there are various recordings of the past webinars. So webinars on demand are on our website. A recording of today will also be added in the next couple of days, but you might want to take a look at those or direct colleagues to those. And in the last 2 minutes, I'm just going to ask Julie if you can post our closing poll. So we really appreciate knowing how useful this has been for you, and it helps us guide future programs to look at who's been here and what you've got from it. So, so please complete that poll before you disappear. I would like to say we really appreciate your time. We really appreciate you giving up the time to be with us today, and thank you very much indeed. I'm glad to see that over 90% of people felt it met their expectations. So yeah, do let us know if you'd like a further conversation in how we can help you or your organisation. And yeah, I just want to end by wishing you all the best with your virtual team building. So goodbye from all of us at Action Learning Associates. Thank you very much.